So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Hayslip. I'm the program manager for the School Safety and Emergency Management program here at the Oregon Department of Education. And I'm joined by some of our staff as well as three gentlemen who are going to be covering some particular, I can't even say it right, some specific instances and considerations that you should have for earthquake planning and preparedness. So, first, what I like to do is start off and get everybody acquainted with what we do here at the School Safety and Emergency Management Program at ODE and why we do the things that we do. So we want to make sure that every community has the knowledge to respond to any disaster or other event that threatens the safety of the community and access available resources to aid in mitigation, response, and recovery. That's one of the reasons we're doing this here today. And we do this in order to maintain a safe and welcoming environment for our schools and the communities they learn in so every person can thrive. So with that, we'll go into, I did want to cover just briefly before we let the presenters take over, talk briefly about what the requirements are at the state level and across the state, starting with schools. Everybody understands and knows this and does their drills monthly. This will change. Some of this will change in the 26-27 school year. We'll keep everybody updated on what some of those changes are going to be. Pretty minor if you're already following what our guidance is. But current year, no change. It's still fire emergencies or evacuations monthly, earthquake and tsunamis across the state twice a year, three times if you're in a tsunami inundation zone to include response procedures for tsunami event. And then safety threats, that includes your lockdown, secure, which is current with the SRP language, shelter and evacuate. And finally, having exit doors capable of opening from inside without a key. Now, what are our requirements? How can we support you? We're supposed to develop the guidance that we have linked on our website, and I'll have a link for that also, or a QR code that you can scan for the stuff that we're discussing today, or the guidance we're discussing today for earthquake protective measures and other incident-specific plans. We develop those and then provide, when requested, assistance for or support for your school or district on developing those procedures. So we're here today to provide some of that, but also if anybody has specific requests for us to come out and expand on this to see what your situation is like and help you with your planning, that's what we can do. So specific to earthquake requirements, in statute, it does say conduct drills and instruction on earthquake response procedures that includes drop, cover, and hold on. So everybody in the building should have the knowledge to respond to an earthquake with the basic drop, cover, and hold on procedures. That's for everybody in your school, in your district. But if you have specific concerns about your structural issues, specific engineering issues with the buildings that you have, you are permitted to conduct or develop procedures in addition to drop, cover, and hold. And some of those considerations that we'd like you all to keep in mind are what we're going to cover today, the kind of the what and why of some of those things. So without further ado, and just to plug it too, that QR code goes directly to the PDF of that incident specific plans document that covers earthquake guidance. And we'll put that link in the chat as well. So without further ado, I am going to let Mr. Chris Goldfinger, Eric Dittmer, and Larry Masterman take over. We have professors emeritus from OSU, Southern Oregon University, and then Larry Masterman is a certified emergency manager with the Preparedness Consulting and Training International as well. So, Chris, if you're ready, I'll go to the next slide and let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm an earthquake geologist. I've been working on Cascadia subduction zone for quite a while, and recently got very interested in the topic of earthquake protective actions as I was in the Tohoku earthquake and got to experience a magnitude 9 earthquake. So I'd like to share a little bit of that, and Alex and Larry will as well. So what I'd like to do is start with the situation that we're in, the setup of the earthquakes and our infrastructure and so on, leading up to the earthquake protective actions. So So our situation in the Pacific Northwest, um, the good part is that the Cascadia subduction zone has been known to be an earthquake hazard since about the middle 1980s, which is quite late in history. Plate tectonics was only accepted in 1964, so we're still learning a lot of big things. But thanks to the effort of a lot of people over the last 3.5 decades, Cascadia has gone from nothing to literally one of the best known faults in the world. So unlike Tohoku, Japan, or in Sumatra, we're not in the situation of being ignorant about the geology. It's very, very well known. So we can actually move, it's relatively easy to move past that part of the discussion into what do we do about it. Um, from the paleoseismology and variety of places, the probabilities stand at about 10 to 15% chance of an M9 earthquake in the next 50 years, which is actually fairly high. And probabilities for any earthquake greater than about magnitude 7 is around 37% in the next 50 years. And so these earthquakes are not all the same. They come in different sizes, which is what that slide shows. And but we don't have any way of knowing which is going to be which. So we generally have to assume that the next one's going to be a 9. And if it's a smaller one, then we get lucky. Okay, Alex. So the bad part is, even though our geologic knowledge is high, our preparedness level across all aspects of this issue is very, very low. And I'm just using Japan as a comparison, as a comparator. So our infrastructure is very fragile. Our building stock is vulnerable. A lot of our buildings were built before plate tectonics, let alone before earthquake building codes. And our training as individuals is relatively poor. And that's not to cast aspersions on people who are working hard on this. It's just that it takes a long time to train an entire society to be good at this. There are currently no requirements for retrofitting in Oregon, except I should just update that the state just added retrofitting for state-owned buildings to try to lead the way on this. But other than that, there's really nothing out there. We're about 85 years behind California, maybe 40 years behind Seattle, and about 1,200 years behind Japan. Okay, Alex. So a little bit more bad. In virtually any kind of disaster or accident, the outcome is decided by a long trail of errors, inactions, or so forth, well in advance. And the pictures on the left are just an airplane crash that happened due to poor maintenance that happened years before the accident. So this means that actions to be taken during the earthquake or other things are unlikely to have that much effect on the outcome. The outcome is decided in building codes, land use planning, retrofitting or lack thereof, and training or lack thereof. The most important factors, therefore, are good decisions made well ahead of time. Most of the decisions influencing the outcome of the next earthquake have probably already been made. Okay. Okay, so in the Pacific Northwest, just zeroing in on how our situation is similar or different than other places, we fall along a spectrum of earthquake vulnerable regions from the worst cases, Iran, Indonesia, Turkey, etc., to the best case, Japan. Every region has specific hazards and specific risk exposure that is unique. We're not Turkey or Iran, but neither are we Japan or California. We have 3 types of earthquakes. Down in the Juan de Fuca slab, like the Nisqually earthquake in 2001, plate interface and crustal earthquakes, like like Japan and Chile, and crustal earthquakes more like California. So our hazard's not dominated by crustal earthquakes of the high intensity, short duration, and no warning time sites like California. Our hazard is dominated by the subduction zone, which is a very different type of earthquake. So that's the first message here: is all earthquakes are not alike. Okay, Alex. So our building stock is old and has a high proportion of URM and non-ductile concrete structures, lift slab. Everyone's heard of unreinforced masonry structures, but there are also a whole bunch of other types of structures that are equally damage and collapse prone. Our building codes only caught up with the hazard in the early 1990s, and there are only limited long-term retrofitting requirements and funding, actually almost none, even for high-risk class structures such as police, fire, hospitals, and schools, what we're talking about today. Our hazard is dominated by not by crustal faults or slab earthquakes down in the Juan de Fuca plate, but by the subduction zone. And so that's actually a good thing. Crustal faults that we know well enough have very long repeat times. We need more research on them. And deep slab earthquakes are not very well known either, but seem to be more important in the Seattle area and have not really occurred in Oregon for a variety of reasons. Okay. So, given the limited power we have to influence the outcome during an event, if it were to happen in the near term, we're nevertheless compelled to try to advise the public on protective actions. We're expected to do this and are the best equipped to think through the problem. Unfortunately, we cannot redesign and retrofit the Pacific Northwest fast enough, and that would be the best solution of all. But we can't save the day that way. We're in this interim period where we know about the hazard, but we have this infrastructure problem. We'll likely have an earthquake with more or less the infrastructure we have now. This means that there are no good solutions, only less bad ones. So what should we say? What should we advise people to do? So we have a highly vulnerable infrastructure in a tectonic region dominated by subduction zone earthquakes, very different from Japan and California or Chile or just about anywhere. So we have a nexus of the worst infrastructure and the best case understanding of the hazard with expected moderate shaking and likely with some warning time. And so we have an automated EEW, earthquake early warning system, but there's a natural warning that you get from light shaking from P waves that happens for inland cities like Portland, for example. We'll have nearly a minute of that before any damaging seismic energy arrives. Okay. So why does this matter? Are earthquakes, are we going to try to determine what kind of earthquake we're having in the middle of it? And the answer is no. In a crustal earthquake, the onset is immediate, the duration is short, and options for protective actions are extremely limited. The outcome will depend on the structure of the building, the baked-in resilience, training to a small extent, and quite a bit of luck. In a subduction zone earthquake, on the other hand, unless you are right at the epicenter, the onset is slower. The light shaking from P waves is an automatic warning system, and the low frequency of these earthquakes makes typical ground motions lower and slower. So in a crustal earthquake in California, you may get up to 1G, enough to lift you off the ground. In Portland or Seattle, the shaking from a subduction zone will be much longer, 3 to 5 minutes, but quite a bit lower intensity, 0.3 of a G, something like that, or less. Okay. So given these really important differences, several things emerge. In a crustal earthquake, protective actions are very limited. Decision time is commonly very low to non-existent. By the time you figure out what's happening, it's already ending and your actions are then post-earthquake. So you find yourself on the floor rolling around wondering what's going on. It's probably going to be a crustal earthquake. And maybe you have time to crawl under a desk and maybe not, if you even have something suitable. In a subduction zone earthquake, on the other hand, the built-in warning time may be up to 2 minutes and the shaking may last 3 to 5 minutes. So time may exist and the lighter shaking may allow taking of some action, even without the automated system, and possibly more time with it, maybe much more. So this means that you don't have to worry about which type of earthquake you're experiencing. You don't have to be a seismologist to try to figure out what's going on. If you even have time to think about it, it's probably a subduction zone earthquake. Okay, next. So that's all the setup. Here we are in the Pacific Northwest with those factors. Now, what do we do? So currently, we and almost every entity in the U.S. recommends drop cover and hold on. This recommendation comes from FEMA, an agency that evolved and used to be called Civil Defense. It was the recommendation for nuclear attack and was widened to all hazards in the 1980s. The problem with it is, and it may work very well in many situations, and it probably does. But the problem is that this recommendation was not vetted before being distributed nationwide. It was simply an administrative decision that it's the best thing to do in nuclear attack, tornadoes, terrorist attacks, hurricanes, and earthquakes. And so that's set up a bit of a problem. We've been recommending this for many years, but how does it really perform in the real world? So let's go ahead. Okay, so does it make sense? In settings with modern buildings built to earthquake codes, then drop, cover, and hold on performs quite well. In that case, the hazard is falling ceiling tiles and lighting fixtures and things like that, not the collapse of the whole building. So Japan is the best example with more than 1,000 years of experience with large earthquakes. Nearly all the old building stock has been destroyed. New buildings are constructed to high standards, often exceeding the minimum international building code standards for life safety. So in cases like this, building collapse is highly unlikely and the hazard is primarily from falling objects inside the building. So drop, cover, and hold on is the best practice. The same is true in other countries with recently constructed buildings using modern codes, including the US, of course. Okay, next. Unfortunately, though, most places are not Japan. Most places have a mix of old and new buildings, and this is common throughout the world. There's not a vast data set on what people's actions are during an earthquake. Unfortunately, this is a place where you can't just use machine learning or something else to drill down and find this data set. What do people do during earthquakes? It just isn't there. There's very limited data, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. Okay, go ahead. So Armenia, 1988. This is one of the worst case scenarios for an earthquake in a highly populated area. 6.8 earthquake, 38,000 were killed, mostly in building collapses. The cities were largely unreinforced masonry buildings, closely packed together with narrow streets. So worst case scenario. Despite the worst case setup and high casualties, many survived by evacuating the lower floors. So it's instinctive to just run outside, which is what we're all told not to do. But in this case, it turned out that survival rates for people who did that were 4 times better than people who stayed in the building. Those on higher floors did not. They didn't have time to go anywhere or do anything. The buildings just collapsed. Building codes were poor, and training for particular actions was non-existent. Okay, go ahead. Mexico City, 1985. In this magnitude 8 earthquake, 10,000 were killed, mostly in building collapses. The cities were largely unreinforced masonry buildings, closely packed together to the point where they were actually bumping together. Despite another worst case scenario and high casualties, some survived by evacuating the lower floors. Those on higher floors mostly didn't survive. This action actually then became the basis for national guidance in the whole country in Mexico, which was stay with it if you're on upper floors, drop, cover, and hold on. But if you happen to be on the bottom floor near an exit, then evacuate. Building codes were fairly good, but they underestimated the ground motions for a lot of reasons we won't go into. Okay, go ahead. Northridge, California, 1971. This was a 6.8 earthquake. 65 were killed. The lower toll is undoubtedly due to better building codes. 2,000 injured. The ones that were injured and killed were mostly in building collapses. This is one of the few cases where some data exists regarding what people's actions actually were that's in the published peer-reviewed literature. People who evacuated from lower floors were more likely to survive, though many had injuries. And that's what the data shows, multiple papers. Building codes were good, but in some cases, construction was skimped and many buildings were older and built with lower codes, which is what we're all kind of stuck with. Okay, next. Luzon, Philippines, 1990. The 7.7 earthquake, 1,283 killed, 2,786 injured, again, mostly in building collapses. So this is another one of the very few cases where data exist in the published literature. And people, once again, who evacuated from lower floors were more likely to survive, though many had lesser injuries. Building codes were poor, and again, many were built with older, lower codes. Okay, next. Padang, Indonesia, 2009, 7.6 earthquake, 1195 killed, 1,200 severely injured, and many others slightly injured, again, mostly in building collapses. Um, Again, this is one of the very few things out there in the published literature where there's information. People evacuated from lower floors were more likely to survive, though many had injuries. Late afternoon time meant that many large buildings were empty, luckily. Um, some schools had late sessions running, however, and several had many survivors who evacuated. Um, one school had 13 of 15 who were killed were on the second floor and couldn't get out in time. So building codes, once again, were poor, and older structures existed with lower codes. Okay, next. And then finally, Loma Prieta, California, we could talk all day about this one, and Larry will talk a bit more about it. In this 6.9 earthquake, 63 were killed, 57 injured, some in building collapses. And again, this one's in the published literature, one of the few. People evacuated from lower floors were more likely to survive once again, though many had injuries. Some were also killed in facade collapses, which is the image on the left. Building codes were good, but many were, once again, old, built with lower codes and no retrofit requirements. Okay, next. Okay, then we're going to go to Larry for this next section. Take it away, Larry.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Alex. So in 1989, I was a paramedic captain with the city of San Francisco. That meant I was in charge of all the EMS operations throughout the city and county of San Francisco for my shift. And since then, I've been an emergency manager. For 4 years, I was the emergency manager for the city of Medford. And even back when I was still a paramedic captain in San Francisco, I had a special interest in special operations, disaster, multi-casualty, hazardous materials, and whatnot. So I've been studying these things a fair bit for a long time, a few decades. We just had the 36th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake just last week, October 17th. So anyway, Alex, this is the building I was standing in when the earthquake occurred. I was on duty. I was standing in a doorway talking with two of the paramedic crews that were coming on duty. And that is not me nor one of our ambulances at the time. But this building is over 100 years old. It's a block building. No retrofits whatsoever. And when the ground started shaking, I was already leaning in that doorway. So I figured, okay, in 1989, that's what they said, find a doorway and hang on. So I did just that. And then when it started shaking in earnest, in fact, I told the crew, the two crews and the logistics people that were also there, I said, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to walk outside. I'd rather get hit on the head by a roof tile. You can see the tile roof there. Figured I'd rather get hit on the head by a roof tile than be in the building if the whole thing came down. So we walked out there, and the ambulances in the parking lot are all dancing around. Every car alarm in San Francisco is going off. The Victorian homes are swaying like minuet dancers, and it was quite a ride. Um, the earthquake itself wasn't scary, other than we knew this was not our run-of-the-mill earthquake. Uh, this was bigger than bigger than anything any of us had experienced before. Okay, Alex. So what a lot of people don't understand about San Francisco is it doesn't resemble its original shape. All the red here is landfill. The yellow is sandy soil that's prone to liquefaction. In the upper center of that image is the Marina District, and you'll see more images of that part of the city. Uh, so between landfill, sandy soils, and different types of construction and different ages, a lot of San Francisco got beaten up pretty bad. Alex, thank you. And the earthquake wasn't even that close to San Francisco. About almost 50 miles away was the epicenter, but it still shook us up real good. Thank you, Alex. So the immediate impacts, we had structural collapses, unreinforced masonry construction, as Chris has already talked about, and wood frame buildings that had been thought would be okay because the wood is flexible, it's ductile. But where they were, for example, multi-story apartment buildings where the ground floor was garage, it was parking for the tenants, those did not fare well. The Interstate 880 Cypress structure collapsed. The Oakland Bay Bridge had a panel fall that put the bridge out of action and killed one motorist outright. Immediately, we had power outages, telephone outages, and whatnot. The power stayed out for 3 days in San Francisco. And that was both a response challenge and actually kind of stunning. On the second night, I was the PM shift watch commander. Pardon me. And there was nothing going on the second night. So I was driving through the financial district with the high rises, and to have the city completely black except the starlight between the high rises was really something to see. Okay, Alex, thank you. So there's the Cypress structure. Of the 63 people who died in this earthquake, 42 of them were on this structure. And had it not been for the World Series game that was about to start, this section of freeway would have been bumper to bumper and probably not moving much. So we could have had thousands of fatalities just there. Now that was in Alameda County, not in San Francisco. But you know, the funny thing is earthquakes don't respect geographic boundaries. So the image on the right there shows people self-extricating from that lower deck. Alex, go ahead next, please. So these are a couple of those soft first-story buildings that collapsed. Next. The non-structural damage, it can complicate, if you don't get out in a hurry, it can complicate your evacuation and any kind of just moving around. Next, Alex. The hospital in Watsonville, California, south of San Francisco, reported that because of the earthquake, their lab had a 3-inch deep soup of various lab chemicals on its whole floor. So non-structural damage is something to think about as well. So if we can get out before the shaking starts in earnest, or shortly after, before any of this other stuff happens, that's something to consider. And that situational awareness is important. Go ahead. This is the Marina District, not exactly a Chamber of Commerce image for you, but along with the other structural damage, gas lines were damaged. And once they found an ignition source, we had a big fire in the Marina District. Next, please. And there it is. That's some of that landfill that we were talking about. Also, at the same time, the city's hydrant system, the fire hydrant system, was put out of service because of damage from the earthquake. The only way this fire could be fought was parking the city's only fireboat in the bay. They laid 6-inch fire hoses over the ground to fight the fire and pump the water from the bay, from the fireboat, to fight that fire. Go ahead, Alex. This was the fireboat at the time. And at the time, it was up for sale. The city didn't see the value in keeping it. Now they have 3 brand new fireboats they've kind of reassessed the value. The city of San Francisco learned a lot from this earthquake, and they've embraced those lessons to their credit. Next, please. So some of the challenges were inadequate and rigid plans, inadequate access during the emergency. The plans, such as they were, a lot of the places where people would gather for emergency coordination, the different departmental operations centers and whatnot, didn't have copies of the plans at all. Many of the plans were out of date. They had unrealistic assessments and expectations of the nature and extent of the damage and the response capabilities, and how response would be compromised by the earthquake itself. Inadequate resource information, both internally and externally, for city resources and others. And they were too rigid to allow discretionary actions. There just wasn't any flexibility built in, and that was important. So the two scary moments for me that day, and I was responsible for the EMS and healthcare response for the first 12 hours after the earthquake. The two scary moments were both related to communication. The first was shortly after the earthquake. Once the shaking stopped, I keyed my walkie-talkie, my handheld radio, and just to see if we had the system was up and running, and it wasn't. I got dead air. That came back on about a minute later once the generators had kicked on and repowered the system. But the idea that we were going to have to handle this without communication was a real challenge. The second was a couple hours later, I was in the Emergency Operations Center when I got a phone call from our captain in communications. He said, "Hey, Larry, you know how we're supposed to have 12 hours of fuel for the generator here for dispatch?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I've got some bad news. We've been doing generator tests for 30 years and never refilling the fuel tank. We expect to be off the air in 20 to 30 minutes. So the beauty was I was in the Emergency Operations Center. So I just stood up and said, "Folks, we need diesel downtown as soon as we can get it. Can anyone help me out?" Police department said, "We don't do diesel." Fire department said, "We're not doing anything but fighting fire." They weren't doing medical calls anymore. They weren't doing anything but fighting fire. Mission narrowing, we called that. So I sat down to work that and about 1,000 other little problems. And after a couple of minutes, I get a tap on the shoulder. "Captain, do you still need diesel fuel downtown?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And it was this timid little voice. He says, "Well, I have a crew loading drums and hand pumps on a stake truck. Where do you need it? We'll be leaving shortly." It was the San Francisco Zoo. And for the 3 days that the lights stayed out in San Francisco, they kept the crew down there and they kept their truck and drums down there. They refueled our generator. They refueled fire engines, diesel powered ambulances, you name it. So it's good to know who your friends are and how to get them. So who knew? I don't even want to know what the truck was used for the day before the earthquake, but who knows? It might have been hauling giraffes or things that come out of giraffes. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead, Alex. So corrective actions for those inadequate and rigid plans: use sound plan development practices. Those are well established. FEMA has some good guidance. Other agencies, private and public, have some good guidance on how to develop effective plans. Research and consider pertinent best practices. Consider all the best practices, not just drop, cover, and hold on, but where you may be in a collapse vulnerable building, what other alternatives are there? How can you find out which of your buildings are subject to collapse and which are going to hold up well? That matters a lot. We need to be brutally honest in all areas where it's necessary. Provide adequate flexibility to respond to whatever issues and combinations emerge. I was criticized by my chief at the time. A few hours into this thing, I got a phone call from San Mateo County Operations, EMS. They said, "We're not doing anything down here. Can you use more ambulances?" I said, "Yes." Now, at the time, we had some problems. Paramedics at the time were only licensed or credentialed county by county. Their paramedics were not authorized in San Francisco. We didn't have compatible radio systems. They didn't have our maps. They didn't know which of our hospitals did pediatrics or other types of calls. I said, have them come to San Francisco General Hospital, the only trauma center on the peninsula, so they knew where that was. And once they arrived, I had one of my paramedics off of each ambulance switch with one of theirs. So they had their 3 ambulances that they sent us had one of our medics with a radio, with knowledge of the system. Just, that gave us 3 ambulances that we didn't have before when we needed them the most. And I was criticized for exercising that flexibility because it wasn't part of the plan. So those plans need to be flexible. And train and exercise to those plans frequently, regularly. Alex, thank you. I've studied since then. I've taught a lot about the earthquake response and recovery, and including looking at after action reports. And the police department in San Francisco had these highlights. The plans underestimated the structural damage. Fire injuries and fatalities were highly localized but intense. There weren't a lot of them all over the city, but there were larger numbers and intensities in the few places they occurred. Lines of authority were unclear, so status updates and logistics were delayed. We can't tolerate delays when we have a choice. Mainframe and computer-aided dispatch computers failed, including our dispatch computers in our EMS communications center, where we had a newer computer-aided dispatch system. Fortunately, the people who were in there working that afternoon had been doing it for a long time, and they remembered the old way of doing cards, dispatch cards, handwritten punch cards for every call, a rack with slots for each ambulance, and all the, it was very low tech. They remembered how to do that. They pulled out the old time clock. They had stacks of the cards still around. So they reverted back to the old way of doing things, and it worked like a charm. Decisions once made must be clearly communicated through the chain of command. That's another observation from the San Francisco Police Department. Couldn't agree more. Okay, Alex. Fire dispatch issues. This is a biggie. The call volume went from a few calls an hour to 500 an hour during the 6 p.m. to midnight period. Now the earthquake was at 5:04 p.m. So for 7 hours after that, they were still getting up to 500 calls an hour with emergency reports. The mission narrowing, I mentioned before, the fire department no longer provided medical response or anything other than fighting fire. Alex? Public Works, their after action report showed that new building assessment program was a most valuable tool. Our final grades should be high, but this should not be misleading. We were lucky. That's a direct quote out of their AAR. We were lucky so many different ways. I mean, just any other Tuesday at 5:04 p.m., that Cypress structure alone would have been mobbed. Alex? On plans, Dwight Eisenhower said once, planning is worthless, the planning process is indispensable. Mike Tyson, one of our great minds, once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. These incidents will punch us in the face, and we have to have a good plan that lets us continue to function even after that. The lesson, have good plans and use them, recognize their limitations, and train and exercise to the plans. Don't just have them sitting on a shelf. Thank you, Alex. So how ready are we? Ask yourself, ask your leadership at your school, your district, or your agency. I was fortunate to spend 10 days studying mass casualty response in Israel many years ago. And this is a quote that's always resonated for me. With commitment, all things are possible. Without it, nothing else matters. It's from a physician at a major hospital in Jerusalem. Alex? So in comparison, the Loma Prieta earthquake, 6.9 magnitude, Tohoku in 2011, 9.0. Cascadia could be every bit that big or even maybe a little bit bigger. Loma Prieta is 15 seconds long. Tohoku, 5 minutes. Cascadia could be 5 minutes plus. The different types that Chris talked about already. The maximum tsunami height for Loma Prieta wasn't a significant threat. Tohoku, 132 feet. They had 40-foot seawalls that were overtopped by the tsunami in Japan. Who knows what we can expect from Cascadia? I could tell you that the natives describe that earthquake in January 26th of the year 1700, before Europeans had colonized California. The natives described it as a battle between the Thunderbird and the killer whale, the earthquake and the tsunami. Their canoes ended up in trees, villages were flattened, you name it. Injured, thousands for Loma Prieta. We estimate 27,000 for a Cascadia earthquake, a big one. Displaced 12,000 people in the Bay Area alone, more than 450,000 in Tohoku. Who knows with the Cascadia? Estimated cost 8 to 10 billion for Loma Prieta, 220 billion for Japan. And the epicenter distance from population, 56 miles versus 81. And Cascadia, that fault line runs from Canada to Mendocino County, California. And now they're starting to see new research that's suggesting that big Cascadia quake will trigger the San Andreas fault as well. So that could even stretch it out further south. Fun stuff, huh? Alex? So that's it for my segment, and I'll stick around afterward if anybody has questions.
Thanks, Larry. And yeah, please be thinking about questions you might have at the end. We'll have plenty of time. So there's quite a bit about the setting that we're in Cascadia. Larry's experiences in Loma Prieta earthquake are invaluable. You know, this is real information, you know, that could be used to design a strategy. So when it comes to this topic, the evidence, the thin amount of evidence that's out there shows that in very vulnerable settings with collapse hazard buildings, staying inside may be the worst choice by a factor of 4. So this comes from one of the very few papers that exist, the 1988 Armenian earthquake. It's a crustal earthquake, the worst case scenario, buildings close together, and so on. But this is situational. If evacuation is chosen and people leave the building only to find narrow streets and more collapsing buildings, it may not be the best choice. Okay, Alex. So in the Pacific Northwest, we have areas that are no better than Armenia and other areas that are much more modern, dominated by less vulnerable structures built up to good codes. We also have a low incidence of areas with tall URM buildings with narrow streets. More common are 1 to 5 story URM structures with wide streets and relatively low spatial density of such structures compared to some places. In other words, our situation is in some cases favorable for evacuation, given the long decision time, slow earthquake onset, and the layout of our cities and towns. But this is individual building specific. Okay, Alex. With schools, many are 1 to 3 floor buildings with playgrounds, sports fields, parking lots outside, and generally lack tall facades, parapets, and upper floors with tons of glass. Some of these are quite old, unreinforced structures and may be good candidates for considering evacuation as an alternative action. Okay, Alex. So the key to moving forward is something called situational awareness, which is a term used in aviation, in the military, and for other high-risk activities. And surviving an earthquake qualifies definitely as a high-risk activity. Actions that perform will depend a lot on situational awareness. That means that there is not a single simple message that will work for everything. And so the picture on the left, everybody has seen, that's the Sullenberger's A320 in the Hudson River. And Sullenberger was not only a former fighter pilot and an airline pilot, but he was also a glider pilot. And people in those situations train extensively to be fully aware of their situation all the times. And for example, what if your engines fail right now at this really awkward moment during a takeoff? And he was able to look around and realize that he couldn't make it to any runway, and the controllers were calling him, "Do you want to go to Teterboro? Do you want to do this or that?" And he just calmly said, "We're going to be in the river." He knew exactly what the glide ratio of an A320 was, and that was his awareness, and that saved the day. So back to earthquakes, will you do the same thing in, say, a modern high-rise built to earthquake codes, a wood frame house, or a two-story URM building? Spoiler alert, number one, drop cover and hold on is your best bet. Two, drop cover and hold on is your best bet there as well. Wood frame houses actually do fairly well in earthquakes. Number three is the problem that we have. And if you're in a URM building near an exit on the bottom floor, you may well have a best bet in evacuation. Okay, Alex. So understanding the risk means knowing something about the age of the building, knowing a little bit about its histories, its construction type and style, knowing about the exits, knowing about any secondary hazards outside. And this doesn't require being a seismologist or an engineer or anything. Usually a quick walk around of most buildings will tell you what you need to know. And in Oregon, all the schools have been surveyed with a rapid visual assessment by an engineer. So this has actually already been done for all the schools. Okay, next. Okay, Eric.
All right. So why are we starting off with schools? This is an environment that has very good prospects for having supervision. Schools already do evacuation drills when we just call them fire drills. There's trained adults involved, keeping the atmosphere low key. There are rapid visual assessments available done, a while back, 2007. But the idea is that most schools know what kind of buildings each of their structures are. And I was connected with 549C here in Medford, Oregon, and they in fact had a structural engineer come and look at the details of all the buildings. You have relatively accessible, safe areas, doors that open from the inside, playgrounds, parking lots that can be looked at to see, where the power lines are. Emergency drills are practiced. And as Chris said, situational awareness. Okay, next slide. This is just a general approach. Anyone that has had a plan or a challenge to do, basically, you're keeping other people informed. Those of you who are on this call are pretty much nervous about what the new responsibility is. Duck cover and hold was relatively easy. This doesn't change that. This says you have an added protective action when you know what kind of school you're in, what your exits are like. And there is information that can help you. You can check with other school districts, look at your current earthquake protective actions, report to the school board, keep them posted, maybe the PTA as well. I was on the school board for Medford 549C, and we had safety issues, but this had not come up when I was on the board. Funding is going to be a challenge. Most school districts now, many of them are losing enrollment, and money is decreasing, and there's other issues, political issues. You probably have a really good start plan, but seeking funding to do the next step is a challenge. The practicing often is, as was just said, is critical. The Department of Education has done an exemplary job of providing you with guidelines, the kinds of guidelines that could be applied to any of your school structures, even if they're multi-story, and looking around as to what can be done. Next slide. Building age, these are the variables: construction design, number of stories, construction materials, the building condition, how old is it, proximity to other buildings, number of stories, what is the occupancy like in each building? And surrounding you, you might experience liquefaction issues and landslide. Okay, next slide. So 549C, this is a 1934 building on the left and on the right. It was it was a high school, then a junior high, then an alternative school, and it held administration. It has been remodeled and retrofitted. We cannot afford to do that with all of our older structures. Okay, next. So a typical building assessment, structural review, describes each building and checks the age, checks the condition, and the materials, and it'll come up with a report like this for 549C, and they've done this with all of their structures. So as far as getting a sense of what your building performance would likely be, that's what Medford 549C did. Now, for you on this call, I can guess you're rolling your eyes because, you're out of time already. You're already overworked. Retrofitting probably is not a timely approach. So evacuation is another option when you know the building is bad and you have good places to go to and people are well trained. So you're going to manage change. Managing change when everything that people and your parents have been told is drop, cover, and hold on. That is going to be a challenge. So developing a team, finding your resources, including the Department of Education, I think would be a good start. Okay, Alex, back to you.